A group of people stands quietly on a hillside, pulling their coats tighter against the cold. The wind moves through the wet grass. Their ultimate hope was not an evacuation plan from a ruined, disposable planet. They were not waiting to become eternal. Floating spirits, the infection of human rebellion was still running through our veins. If God placed us into a new Eden, we would simply ruin the new garden, just as quickly as we ruined the first. Before the earth could be renewed, the humans who were meant to govern it had to be renewed. The curse of death had to be defeated from the inside out. The answer to this massive, cosmic problem did not arrive in a sweeping, global transformation of the planet. The answer arrived in the dark, cold silence of a single, sealed tomb. A heavy stone is dragged across a rough trench, sealing a rock-hewn tomb. The air inside is cold and still. The sharp scent of burial spices hangs heavily in the dark. For 3 days, the body of Jesus of Nazareth lies wrapped in linen, another victim of the Genesis curse, another son of Adam returning to the dust. The Roman executioners had ensured the physical destruction was complete, but on the first day of the week, as the morning sun begins to warm the damp soil outside the tomb, the story of the physical universe permanently changes. When the disciples first see the risen Jesus, they are terrified. Luke's gospel tells us they thought they were seeing a ghost. In their minds, death was the end of the body, playing harps in the sky. Their hope was intensely physical. The common interpretation tells us that the earth is a sinking ship. If Jesus was standing before them, he must be a disembodied spirit, a phantom escaping the grave. But Jesus immediately corrects their assumptions. "Look at my hands and my feet," he tells them. "It is I myself. Touch me and see. A ghost does not have flesh and bones. As you see, I have." Then, to prove the point beyond all doubt, he asks for something to eat. The disciples hand him a piece of broiled fish, and he eats it in front of them. It is a strange, deeply mundane detail to include in the climax of the greatest miracle in history. Why record the eating of a fish? Because a phantom cannot chew, an invisible spirit cannot digest a physical meal. The writer wants the original audience to know, with absolute certainty, that the resurrection is not a spiritual metaphor. The body breathing inside that room is made of matter. Yet, this body is profoundly different. It still bears the terrible scars of the crucifixion, but it is no longer subject to decay. It can enter a room with locked doors, yet it possesses real weight and substance. This is not a simple resuscitation. When Jesus called Lazarus out of the tomb, Lazarus was raised in a mortal body. He would age, get sick, and salvation is a spiritual lifeboat designed to pull our souls into the clouds before the planet is destroyed. We have unknowingly adopted and eventually die a second time. But the body Jesus possesses on Easter morning is indestructible. The Adamah, the dust of the earth, has been taken through death and brought out the other side, completely transformed and immune to the curse. This is why the Apostle Paul calls Jesus the firstborn from the dead and the firstfruits of those who have fallen asleep. In the ancient agricultural world, the firstfruits were the initial, ripened crop of the season. When an Israelite farmer held the first sheaf of grain in his hands, it was a physical guarantee. It proved that the long winter was over, and the rest of the massive harvest was inevitably coming. We often assume the new creation is an event that only happens at the very end of time. But the New Testament makes a staggering claim. The new world did not wait for the end of history. It invaded the middle of history on a Sunday morning. The restoration of the physical universe has already begun, and it started in the resurrected flesh of Jesus of Nazareth. But this creates a profound tension. If the new creation has already been launched in the resurrection of Christ, what does that mean for the rest of the world right now? How do human beings live in the overlap, the philosophy of ancient Greece, which taught that the physical world is bad and the spiritual world is good? But this assumption creates, between the world that is dying and the world that is coming, the Apostle Paul realized this single event changed the definition of reality itself. A man sits in a dusty workshop. his hands calloused from cutting the heavy canvas of tents, dictating a letter to a fractured church in the city of Corinth. The Apostle Paul understands that the resurrection of Jesus was not just a profound historical anomaly, it was a cosmic invasion. But it leaves ordinary believers living in a strange, overlapping tension. If the new world has already begun in the body of Christ, how do we live in a world that is still clearly dying? Paul answers this with a single, radical sentence. Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has passed away. Behold, the new has come. It is a beautiful phrase, often printed on baptism certificates and framed on walls. We usually interpret it as a simple metaphor for a fresh moral start or a forgiven conscience. But Paul is saying something far more massive. To understand the weight of his claim, we have to look closely at the Greek language he chooses to use. In the ancient Greek world, there were two primary words used to describe something new. The first word is neos. Neos means new in time, a massive contradiction within the scriptural text. The biblical story does not end with humanity escaping up to heaven. It describes a brand new replacement. If your clay jar shatters on the stone floor, and you sweep up the broken pieces, throw them in the fire, and buy a completely different jar from the market, you have a neos jar. The old material is entirely discarded. The new material takes its place. The second word is kainos. Kainos means new in quality. It means restored, renewed, and brought to its ultimate, perfected state. If a master craftsman takes that shattered clay jar, gathers the broken pieces, and refires them in a kiln, fusing them together until the vessel is stronger and more beautiful than it was before, you have a kainos jar. It is the exact same material, but it has been radically transformed. When Paul writes that the believer is a new creation, he does not use the word neos. He uses the word kainos. This changes how we read the entire biblical promise. God is not in the neos business. His plan is not to throw the original physical world in the cosmic bin, abandon the Adamah, and start over from scratch in a spiritual realm. His plan is kainos. He is taking the broken, cursed materials of the original creation and redeeming them. When Paul says, "You are a new creation," he means that the resurrection power that raised Jesus from the dead has actually taken up residence inside you. It ends with heaven coming down to a restored earth. The question we must ask is not simply where we go when we die. Believers are not simply waiting to be evacuated in the future. They are walking outposts of the future reality, stationed in the present. They are called to a ministry of reconciliation, the hard, daily work of bringing the healing, justice, and love of the new world into the pain of the old one. But this creates a harsh, deeply personal contradiction. We might be new creations, spiritually, but our physical bodies do not look new. Despite Paul's triumphant declaration, our bodies still ache. Our joints deteriorate. We still contract diseases. We age. We fail. And eventually, our lungs stop taking in air. If the new creation has already begun inside us, how does this promise actually help us? When a doctor delivers a terrible diagnosis, or when we are standing beside the grave of someone we love, Paul faced this exact anxiety in the early churches. And to answer it, he points downward to the soil, and to the profound, physical difference between a buried seed and a blooming flower. A farmer walks across a newly plowed field, dropping small, hard seeds into the dark soil. The wind is cold, and the ground is heavy. If you had never seen a harvest, you would think you were watching a burial. You would look at the dry, lifeless shell of the seed, disappearing beneath the dirt, and you would assume it was gone forever. The early Christians in Corinth were struggling with the exact same terror. The deeper question is what God intends to do with the physical universe He created. What if the soil you stand on is not destined, of physical death that we face today? Surrounded by ancient Greek philosophy, many of them assumed the ultimate goal of salvation was to leave their physical bodies behind and become pure, floating spirits. But when the Apostle Paul writes to them, he completely rejects this evacuation myth to explain the resurrection of the dead. He does not point them up to the clouds. He points them down to the dirt. Paul used the ancient, daily rhythm of agriculture to explain the future of human flesh. What you sow does not come to life unless it dies. He writes, he explains that when a human body is lowered into the grave, it is exactly like a seed being planted. It is sown in dishonor. It is raised in glory. It is sown in weakness. It is raised in power. It is sown a natural body. It is raised a spiritual body. That final phrase, a spiritual body, is the hinge of a massive historical misunderstanding. For centuries, well-meaning readers have looked at those two words in English and assumed Paul was describing a ghost. We imagine that a natural body is made of solid bone and muscle, while a spiritual body is made of invisible, weightless mist. We assume the ultimate victory is to finally escape our physicality. But this completely misreads the original language. For the cosmic incinerator, what if the dirt beside the grave is not a permanent prison, but a temporary seedbed waiting for a harvest? The Greek phrase Paul writes in his letter is soma pneumatikon. In the Greek language of the first century, an adjective with this specific grammatical ending does not describe what an object is made of. It describes what animates the object, or what powers it. Think of how we use language today. A wind-powered ship is not a ship made out of wind. It is a heavy, wooden vessel driven by the invisible force of the wind. An electric train is not a train made out of electricity. It is a physical machine, propelled by an electric current. When Paul contrasts a natural body with a spiritual body, he is not comparing solid matter to invisible gas. A natural body, somi psychikon, is a physical body animated by ordinary, fragile human biology flesh that gets sick, de-ages, and ultimately fails under the weight of the Genesis curse. A spiritual body, some pneumatikon, is still a tangible, physical body, but it is now completely animated, sustained, and driven by the eternal, indestructible power of the Holy Spirit. It is flesh and bone finally made immune to death. The continuity of the person remains completely unbroken. The acorn does not look like the oak tree, but they are the exact same organism, the physical body. This changes everything about how we understand the Christian faith. It changes how we view our bodies, our daily work, our art, our cities. That goes into the ground is the same body that comes out, but its vulnerability has been permanently removed. This is why the graveside is not a place of final defeat. The dirt is not a permanent concrete vault. It is a garden bed. The physical body is not being discarded. It is being planted. This biblical promise gives profound dignity to human flesh, but it creates another enormous question. If our bodies are going to be physically resurrected with real weight and substance, where exactly will we stand? What happens to the mountains, the oceans, and the physical earth we seem to be leaving behind? The earth is not merely a disposable stage for the human drama. It is an active participant in the story, and it has been waiting thousands of years for its own resurrection. A storm moves violently across a dark, restless ocean. Waves crash against jagged coastal rocks, slowly eroding the stone, deep beneath the soil. Tectonic plates shift under immense, crushing pressure. We look at the natural world and see breathtaking beauty, but we also see relentless violence. Every day, the physical earth is subjected to decay, erosion, predators, and natural disaster, and the physical environment around us. Because this is not ultimately a story about evacuation. It is a story about restoration. We often view this cycle of destruction as simply the normal state of the universe. We assume the Earth is just an impersonal rock, a temporary and flawed stage where the human drama plays out before the actors finally leave for heaven. But the biblical writers did not view the Earth as an empty stage. They viewed it as a living participant. In his letter to the Romans, the Apostle Paul writes one of the most astonishing paragraphs in the entire New Testament. He describes the physical universe as if it were a captive waiting in a prison cell. For the creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed. Paul writes, for the creation was subjected to frustration, in hope that the creation itself will be liberated from its bondage to decay. Notice the language. Paul does not say that creation is waiting to be annihilated, so that humans can escape it. He says creation is waiting to be liberated. To understand why the earth needs liberating, we have to remember the original architecture of Genesis. Humanity was not placed on the earth as a disconnected observer. Humanity was placed in the garden as a royal steward. We were meant to be the hinge between heaven and earth, and the sharp. The heavy scent of freshly turned soil fills the air. A wooden casket rests on straps beside a precise, rectangular hole in the ground for centuries. The early church understood a profound reality that many modern believers have forgotten. Death is not the glorious release of the soul, ruling over the physical Adama with the wisdom and love of God. The earth was our kingdom. When humanity rebelled, the earth was caught in the blast radius. The kingdom was cursed because the kings and queens were corrupted. But Paul reveals an incredible reversal. If the physical earth was dragged into decay by humanity's fall, then the earth will be pulled into glory by humanity's resurrection. Paul writes that the entire universe has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth right up to the present time. This metaphor is critically important. A groan of childbirth is entirely different from a death rattle. A death rattle means a body is shutting down, and everything is coming to a violent end. But the pain of childbirth means a new world is pushing its way into existence. The earthquakes, the storms, the decay. Paul says, these are not the sounds of a planet waiting to be thrown into the cosmic incinerator. They are the birth pangs of a new creation. The physical universe is not a sinking ship that God intends to abandon. God intends to pull the ship from the depths, strip away the rot, and restore the timber. Fire is frequently mentioned. From the prison of the physical body, death is an enemy. It is an unnatural tearing apart of what God meant to be permanently joined in biblical judgment. But in the scriptural pattern, the fire of God rarely annihilates. It refines. It burns away the dross to reveal the pure gold beneath. The earth is waiting for us to wake up. It is waiting for the resurrected sons and daughters of God to finally step out of their graves and take up their original Genesis vocation. But this leaves us with a massive theological collision. If our bodies are going to be resurrected, and the physical earth is going to be refined and liberated from decay, where exactly do we spend eternity? If we are not flying away to a distant spiritual realm, what actually happens at the end of the age? The final pages of the Bible provide the answer. And the image they reveal shatters our typical assumptions about the afterlife completely. The Apostle John stands in exile on the jagged, rocky coast of Patmos. The Aegean Sea crashes against the stone as he stares into a prophetic vision that will close the biblical canon. For centuries, Christians have read his final document, the Book of Revelation, looking for a map of how the world will end. We search its pages for the moment when the physical planet is finally discarded and human souls are pulled away into the clouds, together spirit and flesh, heaven and earth. The ultimate promise of the Bible is not that we will escape our physical bodies, but when John looks at the ultimate climax of history, he does not see an evacuation. He sees an arrival. Revelation, chapter 21, opens with a staggering vision. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away. The old, corrupt architecture of reality, infected by the Genesis curse, has been entirely refined and transformed. But notice carefully the direction of the movement that follows. John writes, I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God. This single sentence completely dismantles our modern assumptions about eternity. At the end of the biblical narrative, humanity does not go up. Heaven comes down. The trajectory of redemption is unashamedly earthly. The spiritual realm is not replacing the physical world. It is invading it, healing it, and permanently fusing with it. The Creator refuses to cede the physical soil to the power of death. As the brilliant city descends, John hears a loud voice from the throne room, announcing the central promise of the entire Bible. Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. The Greek word John uses for dwell is profoundly physical. It is the verb skeno, which literally means to pitch a tent or to tabernacle in the ancient wilderness, but that we will get them back, entirely renewed. The physical world is not a rough draft that God eventually plans to throw away. The presence of God was localized inside a fragile, temporary tent of animal skins. Later, it was restricted to a dark, carefully guarded room inside a stone temple in Jerusalem. But here, at the end of the age, God is bringing his unshielded glory down to the physical earth. He is pitching his tent permanently among the human race. Because of this total saturation of divine presence, John notices a shocking architectural omission. I did not see a temple in the city. He observes, in the ancient world, a city without a temple was unthinkable. The temple was the single designated place where the spiritual and physical dimensions were allowed to overlap. But in the new creation, a specialized building is no longer necessary. The Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are its temple. The fracture that tore reality apart in the Garden of Eden has been completely repaired. The entire renewed planet has become the Holy of Holies. The overlapping space of Eden has expanded to cover the globe. John tells us that God will wipe every tear from their eyes. Death, mourning, crying, and pain are abolished because the separation between heaven and earth that caused them no longer exists. The city has descended. Heaven and earth are finally, permanently reunited. But as John walks through the open gates of this restored reality, one final detail remains. The earth matters. But to understand why the story ends with a renewed physical universe, we cannot begin at the final pages of Revelation. In the very center of the city, he sees a living physical object that has been missing since the very beginning of the biblical story. To complete the journey, the final chapter of Revelation must take us all the way back to the first. John looks down the center of the great street of the New Jerusalem. There, growing on both sides of a crystal-clear river, is a familiar, ancient sight. It is the tree of life. This is the exact tree that humanity was exiled from in Genesis chapter 3. But it is no longer hidden in a lost garden, guarded by cherubim and a flaming sword. It stands completely accessible in the middle of a bustling, brilliantly lit city. The text tells us it bears 12 kinds of fruit, yielding a fresh crop every month, and its leaves are for the healing of the nations. The physical world has been permanently cured. John writes the definitive, final verdict of the entire biblical narrative. No longer will there be any curse. Notice the breathtaking trajectory of the whole story. God does not simply hit a cosmic reset button and put humanity back naked in an uncultivated garden. The Bible begins in a garden, but it ends in a garden city. Human history, culture, and architecture are not thrown into the fire and forgotten. Revelation specifically says that the kings of the earth will bring their splendor into the city. God does not scrap the human project. He perfects it. We have to go back to the very first pages of Genesis. To understand the end of the story, we have to examine the original blueprint. If this is the true end of the story, then it changes how you must live tomorrow morning. If the Christian hope was merely a spiritual evacuation, then this physical world would not matter. You could treat your body, your cities, and the earth itself like a cheap rental property, simply waiting for the lease to expire. But if the new creation is a physical reality, then your physical life right now carries eternal weight. Every act of genuine love, every piece of honest art you create, every meal you share, and every time you stand up for justice, none of it is wasted energy on a doomed planet. When you build something true and beautiful in this life, you are practicing the culture of the next. You are pulling the future reality of the new creation into the present. This is not a story about waiting for an escape helicopter. It is a story about participating in the restoration of a home, which brings us all the way back to the hillside, the cold wind, and the graveside. When we stand beside the casket of someone we love, the grief is intensely real, because death is an unnatural enemy that tears heaven and earth apart. But when we understand the true biblical promise, our posture changes. We do not need to pretend that the physical body was just a disposable, meaningless shell. We do not need to look up at the gray clouds, searching for comfort in the idea of a weightless, invisible afterlife. Instead, we can look down and look closely at the raw materials the Creator held in His hands when the world was new. We can look at the dark, heavy soil of the Adama. We can see the dirt not as a concrete vault, but as a temporary garden bed, because we know that the Creator is not finished with the earth. The King is returning. The physical world is waiting to be liberated, and the seeds have been planted. The long winter of the curse is ending, and the harvest is coming. The biblical narrative does not begin in a weightless, invisible realm. It begins in the dirt. When we read the opening chapters of Genesis, we are not reading about the construction of a temporary stage that will eventually be demolished. We are watching a Creator who loves physical matter. He shapes light, separates oceans, and carves out valleys. A minister steps forward and offers the familiar, comforting words. They are no longer here. Their soul has gone to heaven, to a better place. At every stage of the process, he pauses, looks at the material reality he is building, and pronounces a verdict. It is good. The physical universe is not an accident, and it is certainly not a holding cell for spiritual beings. It is a masterpiece. The climax of this process is intensely tactile. In Genesis 2, God does not simply speak humanity into existence from a distant throne. He gathers the dust of the earth and forms a physical body. In the Hebrew text, this connection is permanently built into the language. The word used for humanity is Adam, and the word for the physical soil is Adama. To read the original, Hebrew is to hear a constant, rhyming reminder of our origin. We are the earth creatures. We are literally the ones from the soil. We are the Adama that has been given breath. Hundreds of years later, ancient Greek philosophers would argue that the physical body was a tomb. They taught that the material world was corrupt and heavy, a prison restricting the pure, intellectual soul. But the ancient Hebrew worldview rejects this completely. God looks at the physical, flesh and blood human, standing barefoot on the physical soil, and He declares it Tov Mi'ad, very good. They have finally been freed from the burdens of this broken physical world. Everyone looks up at the gray clouds. It is a beautiful sentiment. Matter is not evil. The physical world is fully capable of bearing the divine image. This brings us to the Garden of Eden. The familiar interpretation views Eden merely as a lush park, a paradise of fruit trees and innocent animals. But to the ancient reader, Eden was something much more profound. It was a temple. We often imagine as two distinct places, separated by millions of light years, a spiritual realm far above, and a physical realm far below. But in the biblical architecture, heaven and earth were created to overlap. Eden was the exact geographical location where those two dimensions intersected. It was the place where the space of God and the space of humanity occupied the same territory. The physical world was pure enough to safely host the presence of God. The text says the first humans could hear the sound of the Creator walking in the garden, in the cool of the day, the damp soil beneath their open sandals, the rough bark of the trees, and the wind moving through the leaves were not secular things. They were sacred. This was the original blueprint, a physical universe, permeated by the spiritual presence of its maker. God never intended to rescue human souls away from the Adama. It is the dominant belief of the modern Christian world. It is the ultimate hope we offer when a human life ends. He intended to dwell with them upon it forever. But if the physical world was designed as a perfect, overlapping temple, why does it now feel so hostile? Why do our bodies break down in pain? Why do we now associate the soil, not with the breath of life, but with the cold silence of the grave? The original blueprint was compromised. And the fracture that occurred did not just break the human heart. It broke the ground itself. A sharp thorn pierces the skin of a human hand. A drop of blood falls into the dry dirt, mingling with the sweat of an exhausted brow. This is the physical reality of Genesis chapter 3. The original harmony is gone, replaced by resistance and decay. When the first humans chose to define good and evil for themselves, they did not simply break a legal command. They fractured the architecture of reality. The overlapping space of heaven and earth was torn apart. Notice exactly what happens in the biblical text. When God pronounces the consequences of human rebellion, He does not only speak to the man and the woman, He speaks to the dirt. Cursed is the ground because of you. God declares, it will produce thorns and thistles for you, that the physical body was merely a temporary shell, a disposable, decaying container. We assume that our true, eternal destiny is a disembodied spiritual realm, and you will eat the plants of the field. The intimate, life-giving relationship between the Adam and the Adamah has been poisoned. The soil that once freely offered its fruit must now be fought. Human work, originally designed as a joyful partnership with the Creator, becomes an exhausting battle against a hostile environment. But the deepest tragedy of this fracture is revealed in the final sentence of God's warning. By the sweat of your brow you will eat your food until you return to the ground, since from it you were taken. For dust you are, and to dust you will return. This is the biblical definition of death. It is the tragic unraveling of Genesis 2. The breath of God departs, and the earth creature collapses back into the raw material from which it was carefully formed. If we view the physical body as a heavy prison, death seems like a victory, a glorious release of the soul into the spiritual clouds. But the biblical authors do not view death as a friend. They view it as an intruder. Death is a violent, unnatural tearing apart of what God meant to be permanently joined. It is an amputation. The soul without the body is incomplete, just as the earth without the full presence of heaven is incomplete, somewhere out there, far beyond the stars. The problem is not that this idea lacks comfort. The problem is that it completely contradicts. Because of this cosmic fracture, humanity is sent into exile. The text tells us that God drove the humans out of the garden, placing cherubim and a flaming sword at the eastern entrance to guard the tree of life. The door between heaven and earth swings shut. The humans are forced to turn their backs on the sanctuary of God and walk out into a harsh, untamed wilderness. The physical world, separated from the immediate, life-giving presence of its maker, begins to age and decay. This is the broken world we now inhabit. This is the world of the funeral, the hospital room, and the graveside. If the story ended here, the evacuation myth might make perfect sense. If the physical world is permanently infected by sin and death, perhaps the only logical solution is to abandon it entirely and evacuate human souls to a distant, safe, spiritual realm. But the Creator refuses to abandon His masterpiece. With the world broken and humanity locked out of the garden, how could the original project possibly be salvaged? For centuries, the people of Israel waited in the dust for a solution, until their prophets began to see an impossible horizon. The centuries of exile were long and heavy. Generation after generation, the people of Israel lived under the weight of the Genesis curse, the actual climax of the biblical story. If you read closely through the pages of the New Testament, you will find a shocking absence. Empires rose and fell. The physical soil absorbed the blood of countless wars, and the bodies of kings and slaves alike returned to the dust. But in the midst of this long, historical defeat, a new kind of voice began to speak in the streets of Jerusalem and the camps of Babylon. The prophets of Israel were not merely predicting the distant future. They were looking past the smoke of burning cities to see the original blueprint restored. When men like Isaiah looked at the horizon, they did not see a fleet of spiritual chariots arriving to evacuate righteous souls to the clouds. They saw something far more radical. They saw the physical world healed. Listen to the exact language of Isaiah chapter 65. Speaking through the prophet, God declares, "See, "I will create new heavens and a new earth." If we read that phrase with our modern assumptions, we imagine God permanently destroying the physical planet and transferring us to a weightless, invisible realm. But look closely at what Isaiah says the inhabitants of this new world will actually do. They will build houses and dwell in them. They will plant vineyards and eat their fruit. No longer will they build houses and others live in them, or plant and others eat. This is not a description of disembodied spirits playing harps in the sky. This is a vision of an intensely physical, agricultural, and cultural reality. The Bible rarely talks about going to heaven when we die. When Jesus, Paul, and the early apostles spoke about the future, it is human life functioning exactly as God always intended. Finally free from the infection of sin and the frustration of the curse, the prophets imagined a world where the heavy iron used for swords and spears is dragged to the fire, melted down, and hammered into plowshares, tools designed for cultivating the Adama. The physical metal is not destroyed. It is repurposed for life. Even the ancient hostility of the natural world is pacified. The wolf lies down with the lamb. The leopard rests next to the goat. A young child plays near the den of the cobra without fear. The fracture between heaven and earth is repaired, and the ground itself is no longer an enemy. The prophetic hope of the Old Testament is unapologetically earthly. It is about justice rolling down like a physical river. The Creator's plan is not to abandon the project of creation, but to wash it clean, to pull the thorns and thistles out by their roots, to flood the earth with the knowledge of His glory as the waters cover the sea. The prophets painted a breathtaking picture of a restored planet. But this beautiful vision created an impossible problem. If God suddenly restored the earth to its perfect, uncorrupted state, how could broken, sinful humans survive in it?